We're going to start session 6, and we are going to be continuing to talk about the book of Revelation. So, just as a reminder, what Revelation is, it does not mean any kind of scary thing like some people think. It literally means the apocalypso is the word, and it literally means the unveiling. So, it's not some scary thing like a lot of people make it out to be. It's the consummation of all things. I mean, and it is the revelation that God the Father gave to Jesus Christ to give to the churches. And it's the only book that promises a special blessing for reading it. So it has 404 verses, 800 allusions to the Old Testament, and we'll start getting into more and more of those allusions as we get further into the book, because as we dive into um, chapter 4 and beyond, those illusions start going everywhere. There's some that we see just in these first couple of chapters, but we'll start to see them more and more. And it's God's plan for man. So go back to our outline. Revelation 1:19 gives us the outline for the book. The vision of Christ is chapter 1. The 7 churches are chapter 2 and 3. And it's really we get all excited about all the crazy stuff that's going to happen, the 1,000-pound hailstones falling, and demon hordes coming out of the abyss, all kinds of things like that. We get all excited about those things, but we as a church, as I've already kind of talked, won't be here for any of that fun stuff. So we're probably fortunate that we won't be here for those things. But the real focus for the church is on chapter 2 and 3, which is why we kind of take our time going through chapter 2 and 3. We'll do one church tonight. We're going to do the Church of Philadelphia, and then we'll finish up with Laodicea in 2 weeks. And then we'll move into what I consider is the fun stuff, that get into all the crazy stuff and start getting into all the ties back into the Old Testament and all the doom and gloom and craziness that happens after that. So the 7 churches, and we see in all 7 of these epistles that Jesus wrote to the churches, it always has this phrase: he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches, plural. So it's applicable across the board to all those churches as well as us today. And it is funny, we were talking about Philadelphia tonight, because Philadelphia is one of those churches that everybody thinks they are. You hear what, like, oh, we're Philadelphia. And you're like, it's so funny when people say that. You got all even these denominational churches. Oh, we're Philadelphia. Well, no, you're actually not. You're actually the one we talked about last time. You're actually Sardis if you're a denominational church, and not Philadelphia. But we'll get to Philadelphia as we go through these 7 letters that Jesus gave to the churches. They all have this heptadic structure of 7s. The name of the church, the title of the church, the title of Christ that's given, the commendation, the concern, the exhortation, the promise of the overcomer, and the he that hath an ear. But as you see in the first 3 churches, he that hath an ear comes before the promise to the overcomer. Or it comes after the promise to the overcomer. It's kind of an interesting thing that it shifts when we move into these latter books in chapter 3. So just as a refresher on Sardis, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but the whole format of it, the title of Christ, is always given, and the one he used there is he that hath the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. And he said, I know thy works, and thou hast a name. And like as I mentioned about Sardis last week, it's very interesting with Sardis, because Sardis has a name, and he says, thou livest and art dead. It sounds very much like a denominational church to me when you look at it, because all these denominations that we have all around the world, and and what they represent, it's really interesting, because you see all these churches with all these different all these denominations and all their fancy names and all of these things. It's like there's a lot could be said about that. And the interesting thing about Sardis, it was supposedly impregnable. as we talked about, but yet it was taken multiple times. And the term that is used, and conquerors would scale up the cliffs. Now, the whole thing is like a thief in the night. And that's the theme of Sardis that Jesus uses. He'll come like a thief in the night to them if they don't turn from what they're doing. So he's giving them a strong warning. And Sardis becomes synonymous as a city of failure. So it's really not a church you want to, if you really don't want to be Sardis, in my opinion. And so denominational church, they are soft on their hermeneutics. They deny the millennial reign of Christ. Most of the denominational churches today, not the Bible churches and those other groups, but the denominational churches, the Methodists, the Episcopalians, the Lutherans, the Presbyterians, all of these different denominations all have a common trend that they've held for their time in existence. They very much are what we call amillennial. They don't believe in a literal millennial reign of Christ. And they also deny Israel's prophetic destiny, which I think is a big deal personally. Um, and also, these denominational churches, there's really not a devotional life in them. They're very formal the way that they are, and they're very legalistic in a lot of their ways. And they've more and more of the recent years been de-emphasizing the gospel of Christ. So we're about to get to a church that is a good church. So if we look at our design tally and where we stand now, we can see here Sardis sits just like Thyatira. The promise to the overcomer comes before or excuse me, he that hath an ear comes before the promise to the overcomer, unlike those first three churches. And if we look at a prophetic profile, the apostolic church was Ephesus, and it's very clear that kind of fits the picture. The persecuted church, Smyrna. Pergamos was the married church, and Thyatira is the medieval church, which we represent as the Roman Catholic Church in some of the comparisons we were doing as we were discussing this. And the interesting thing about that first group of churches from Ephesus to Pergamos, you really can group those together because of the way that this thing is structured, because of this, of where the promise to the overcomer is placed. Only in those three is it at the very end. In the others, it's switched. And so we can definitely see that the Holy Spirit's kind of putting a marking on them. And in these four, these are the latter ones. And the interesting thing about these four, those first three, he says nothing about the tribulation, the great tribulation to those churches. But the medieval church and onward, he makes warnings to those churches about being cast into the great tribulation if they don't repent. So whatever that actually means, and we'll get into that later in the study. And Sardis, well, we don't really know what's, come of them. We know those churches are gone, but what we want to really focus on is Philadelphia right now. And Philadelphia is a church we all long to be. So the letter opens, chapter Revelation 3:7, and to the angel of the church of Philadelphia, write. Philadelphia, if we follow the circle around with Philadelphia, coming around here, I don't know if it's going to let me. And where is it doing? Hold on. It's not letting me in. I hate on this. Is it down there?
I saw it.
I don't know where. Oh, there it is. I saw it a second ago. Where'd it go? Hold on. We'll play find the cursor. There it is. All right. So here, if we follow the churches around, we start with Ephesus, then Smyrna, then Pergamos. It's kind of interesting that they're in the order they're in, but it's also kind of the way they flow. And then Thyatira, and then Sardis, and now Philadelphia, you can see sits over here right before Laodicea. So it was really close to Laodicea. They're really all not that far from each other, honestly. Now, Philadelphia is actually the youngest city of these churches, of these seven churches, where the seven churches were. The city of Philadelphia was established in 189 BC. And the interesting thing is how it got its name. There was a king, King Emus, the king of Pergamus. He had a younger brother named Adelaus the second, who also became his successor. But they were very close to each other, and they were very much brotherly love between each other. And a lot of people think the word Philadelphia means brotherly love. We'll get to that in a minute. It's not just brotherly love, but it's just a a friendship kind of love more than anything. So the thing about Philadelphia, the geographic area of it, it has just like Greece, it's very well favored for wine production and olives and things like that. So very much they adopted Dionysus. So Philadelphia is what we're talking about. And we talked about Sardis last time, and Philadelphia. Uh, we're gonna, the letter we start with the letter to Philadelphia, the Revelation 3:7, angel of the church of Philadelphia, write. And then Philadelphia is located in this circle of these seven churches in what we call Asia Minor, which is now part of Turkey. And you can see that the order in which they are listed as we go through the seven, starting with Ephesus and working our way around to Laodicea, they're in the exact order, which is also interesting because the order of those also fit with church history at a big picture. But if they were in any other order, it really wouldn't fit. So Philadelphia, it's the youngest city of any of these cities in Asia Minor, and it was built by it was acquired by Pergamus in 189 BC is and that's when they built it. And King Ximenes the second, he was the king of Pergamus. This is still when the Greeks were ruling, and he had a younger brother named Adelaus the second, who also became the successor after him. But the thing is, how the city got its name, these two brothers had a real strong affection for each other. They had a very strong brotherly love. Now, Philadelphia doesn't, a lot of people think it means brotherly love. It's more a friendship kind of love is what it means. And so that's Philadelphia, and we'll talk more about it as we go here. Now, Philadelphia, because of where it is placed in Asia Minor, it's very favorable for wine production. And because of that, because of wine being so abundant there and olives, the Dionysus was adopted as the deity over the area. And it was also a post for the Roman Empire between Troas and Pergamus that was established by Rome, that was a gateway to Asia Minor that Rome established. So Rome kind of took over this. The name got changed a few times, but it wasn't always called Philadelphia. It initially was, but the name got changed to the burned land. I can't pronounce that Greek word. Keka. Good luck with that name. Keka. I don't know. But anyway, it means the burned land. The thing is, that region of Asian Minor is very volcanic. It's very seismic, a lot of seismic activity there. There's actually been some major earthquakes there. There were repeated earthquakes, and you can see that according to Tacitus in his annals, that the city was completely destroyed in a disaster in 17 AD. So this is in the time before Jesus started his ministry. This city was devastated, that along with 10 other cities, by a massive earthquake. Now, after this earthquake, the name got changed to that other name that you saw there. But the interesting thing is, this was such a bad earthquake that tremors were reported for years after the fact. Years. Most of the time, tremors we see are just like short periods of time, but these continued on and on. Maybe they were new earthquakes, but they were recorded by the historians of the time as tremors, that it continued. And so it caused a lot of disruption in Philadelphia that lasted for like 20 years. So the name gets changed again. Thinking about Tiberius, which we should all be familiar with Tiberius. He renamed the city to the new, well, imagine that, the new city of Caesar, or Neo Caesarea is what he named it to. And then after him, Vespasian comes in, another Roman emperor, and he changed it to Flavia, which was his family name. And then that name was short lived, and the Philadelphia name was soon restored. But today, that city is not called Philadelphia. That city is called Allah Shehu, which means city of God in Arabic, because Allah is whatever their God or whatever, but it means city of God. Obviously not our God, but their God, the Muslims. But the city got named, that is its current name, but it did get Philadelphia back for a while. So that's kind of the history of Philadelphia without going too far into it.
Bless you.
So all of these epistles have these things in common, the heptadic structure. So the next thing after the naming the church or the city for the church is the title of Christ. And the interesting thing is, the title of Christ here is a very, very interesting title compared to some of the others. It says, "These things saith he that is holy, he that is true, and he that hath the key of David. And he hath opened and no man shut, and shut and no man opens." So the holy, let's start with that and kind of dissect this verse. So it starts with that he is holy. Well, we know he is holy. Holy is used several times in the Bible, quite a few times. The Song of the Seraphim in Isaiah 6 has holy, and you remember the holy, holy, holy thing, that then we'll see it in Revelation as well. In Revelation 6:10, when they fall on their faces, they cry, "Holy, holy, holy," because they see the majesty and the magnificence of God. Also, at his birth, when Jesus is born, the term holy is used. At his death, holy. It's mentioned in Acts 2:27. And in the presence of his priestly office is mentioned in Hebrews. So holiness is what he is. So holy is, we know that's Jesus. He's also true, which means in the Greek, he's real, he's genuine. This is in contrast to falsehood. And the prophecy of Zacharias in Luke 1:75 makes reference to this. Again, you can go back and look at some of these references. And Psalm 2 makes references to his trueness and the truth that is in him. And Psalm 24, as well as other passages. So the other part of that verse, and just go back here. So the holiness and true, but it says he has the keys of David. So the keys of David, where does that come from? Because people often go, because again, it's not something that's a New Testament concept. This concept originates in the Old Testament. And where does it originate? It's in Isaiah 22 is the first time we see it. And in Isaiah 22, it says, "And it shall come to pass in that day that I will call my servant Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, and I will clothe him with a robe and strengthen him with a girdle, and I will commit the government into his hands. And he shall be the father of the inhabitants of Jerusalem into the house of Judah." Continuing on, "And the key of the house of David I will lay upon his shoulder. So he shall open and none shall shut. And he shall shut and none shall open. And I will fasten him as a nail in a sure place. And he shall be it shall be for a glorious throne for his father's house." Now, this is very much leading into a messianic prophecy, because we talk about, Jesus has the keys of David. And this is where some of that first comes from, out of Isaiah, when he mentions this. Yes, in the local sense, it's talking about Eliakim, but in the grander sense, it's talking about King Jesus. And continuing on, "And they shall hang him upon with all his glory of his father's house, and the offspring and issue, and all the vessels, small quantity vessels of cups, even the vessels of flagon. In that day, saith the Lord of hosts, shall the nail that is fastened in a sure place be removed and cut down and fall, and the burden that was upon it shall be cut off, for the Lord hath spoken. So we see this reference in Isaiah, and you can very much see the tie-in. We see the nail there, and there's a lot of things we could get into with the whole thing with the nail, because the nail, if you look at the word Yahweh in the Hebrew, the Yod He Vav He. Well, if you look at those letters in the original older Hebrew manuscripts, the way they were written, what they represented, you have uh, the He, um, the that represents a nail. If you look at it, it looks like a nail. I don't have a picture of one right now, but it looks like a nail. And it's very interesting because some people have made some interesting leaps. I think they may be right, but I'm not exactly sure. But the Yod He Vav He, it's like behold, because the nail's in there twice. And he was nailed, his hands and his feet. So Yod He Vav He, and it's behold the nails in his hands, I believe is what the way it actually the word Yahweh that we deem as one of the highest names of God actually has a reference to Jesus in it. So the key of David, Eliakim, if you don't know who he was a treasurer. He's mentioned in Isaiah, and he carried a heavy key. Talks about it in the Bible. And this key, think about keys. Keys open doors, right? That's what they're for, is to open a door that's shut in front of us. And so he had the authority to carry this key, and it was this big key, and he had the ability with this key. This key was a symbolic key. It wasn't an actual key that opened a door. The key that he wore was what would give power to allow someone an audience with the king, or to deny someone an audience with the king. So he was the one that provided access to the king. So when we talk about the keys to the kingdom, because we know that reference in the New Testament several times, Jesus tells Peter first, upon this rock I'll build my church. And he said, the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And he talks about the keys. He gives Peter the keys to the kingdom mentioned in Matthew 16:19. And the Catholics try to make too big a deal about that, saying Peter was the first pope and all these kinds of things. But Peter was not the only one given that. Jesus in Europe, if you've seen The Chosen, it's kind of funny because when they asked Jesus about who can sit at his right and his left, they get really upset because of two of the disciples asking that question. And then when he bestows this on Peter, they get really upset about it. I don't know how accurate that is, but the scripture kind of indicates they were upset about him giving that to Peter. They felt like he was playing favorites to Peter. But then he comes along in Matthew 18 and he gives it to all the apostles, the same keys to the kingdom. And not to be left out, the Gentiles in Acts 10 are given the keys to the kingdom. And then Peter even clarifies it in his first epistle about the keys, that it's not just for him, it's for the whole church. So the keys to the kingdom, there's the verse in Matthew, there, verse 15 through 17. But he said unto him, but who say ye that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said unto him, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. So that's the first reference we see to this, about him giving them that authority. And then he goes on to say, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. We quote this scripture all the time in our charismatic circles about binding and loosing. And this is the reference where this comes from. And so if we look at that, Peter, he said, "Thou art Peter," because he changed his name from Simon to Peter. He uses the word Petros when he says Peter. But it's interesting when um, he also uses the word Petra. So he's Peter Petros, and upon this rock Petra. So it's big rock versus little rock kind of thing. So the foundation stone, this is where Peter makes that reference in First Peter, and he kind of clarified it. To whom coming um, as unto the living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious. Ye also are lively stones, and built upon a spiritual house and a holy priesthood, and offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God. Wherefore also it is contained in the scripture, behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect precious, and he that believeth on him shall not be confounded. So Peter's clarifying this whole thing that Jesus is the foundation stone. And unto you, therefore, which believe he is precious, but unto them which are disobedient, the stone will be the one the builders rejected. The same shall be the head of the corner. So he's talking about Jesus as the cornerstone of the church, not Peter, Jesus. And a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, even to those who stumble on the word. So the foundation stone. Now Peter says here that we are a royal priesthood. Well, the interesting thing is about the royal priesthood here in 1 Peter 2:9. What is the royal priesthood? If you remember, it's not something that's mentioned very much in the Bible. The first, because to be royalty and priest are two separate things. So you're either a priest or you're a king. This is the way things worked, in the Old Testament. But there's a weird story in the book of Genesis where Abraham encounters Melchizedek. And Melchizedek, basically, Abraham bows down to him and has communion with him. I don't know who, we don't, I mean, and then Melchizedek disappears from the pages. But it says he was a king and a priest. So he was the first king and priest. But then if you go to Psalm 110, it mentions Melchizedek again. And then Melchizedek is also mentioned in the book of Hebrews, where we kind of get unravel and understand who he actually was. Well, we don't know exactly who he was, but it explains that he was a king and a priest. So there's only royal priesthood. There's only three mentioned: Melchizedek, Jesus is called a king and a priest, and the church. Those are the only royal priesthood that there is. So this is more of the binding and loosing. I think I duplicated that. All right. So let's go to the commendation now for Philadelphia. I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door. So it's interesting. He was talking about the keys earlier in this letter. And then now he's talking about a door being open before them, which no man can shut. And he said, for thou hast little strength, but thou hast kept my word and hast not denied me or denied my name. And so he's saying a lot of good things right here. And then he says, and we'll talk about them one by one in just a second. And he says, behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them come up and worship before thy feet and know that I have loved thee. It's an interesting part of that verse, and we'll come to it in a minute, the synagogue of Satan. We've talked about it a little bit when we're looking at other churches because it comes up time and time again, but I'll address it head on shortly. So the commendation in this letter, the commendation itself has a heptadic structure. So if we look, here's the heptadic structure of the commendation. He says, I know thy works. So he knows, he's saying, he's talking good about him. I know you're doing good. You're faithful to me. You're serving me. You're doing these things. So that's the first commendation he gives them. And then he says, "I set before you an open door, and no man can shut it." You remember all of these epistles that Jesus wrote. He that has an ear, the whole thing about he that has an ear, and I stand at the door and knock, and these things. So you're going to see it different when we look at Laodicea next time. But with Philadelphia, he's saying, I know they have little strength. You've kept my word. You've not denied my name. So they have been faithful to the end. And if you notice, this is the only one of the epistles in Revelation that has this heptatic structure on a commendation. All the other commendations are much shorter than this. He's really going out of his way to admonish this church and commend them for what they've done. And then he says, "Behold, I will make them come and worship before thy feet and know that I have loved thee." That's the sixth commendation. 7, I also will keep thee from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon the whole world to try them that dwell upon the earth. This is a very interesting verse, and we'll get to it shortly and kind of break it down a little bit. But if we look at these commendations, the second commendation, I've set before thee an open door, no man can shut it. And we talked about open doors and other, there's all kinds of doors mentioned in Scripture. 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians and Colossians, even the book of Revelation. There's a door standing open in the heaven in Revelation chapter 4 that we'll come to. And Jesus says, I am the door. So there's lots of references to doors, and Jesus is the door of deliverance. Now, also as doors that we think about, well, Noah's Ark had a door. Noah didn't close the door. God closed the door and closed them in, which has some interesting prophetic implications in that in itself. And then the door at the wedding in Matthew chapter 25. We won't go into Matthew 25 today, but we will in a later time. But in Matthew 25, when he's talking about the wedding, and there's a door at the wedding. So doors are all over the place in Scripture, and they are invitations. The third commendation, you have little strength, and you've kept my word in the day of denial, because there's lots of denying him going on in this time frame, and even after this, later centuries, this thing went on. A lot of denial in the church. You've not denied my name. A lot of these other churches had become very worldly. Philadelphia had been faithful. And in the day which so you've not denied my name. So in a day when the deity of Christ is blatantly denied by seminaries and pulpits all around the world, this group held true to what they believed. And much of the church today would fit into this category. Obviously not all. So he says here, and this is a commendation because he's saying, behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but lie. So he says, because you didn't take part in this, he says, I will make them come and worship before your feet, which is interesting. He's not saying Jesus's feet. He's saying the church in Philadelphia, he's going to make those people that basically practice replacement theology worship before their feet, which is interesting. I don't know what to make of it, but it's very interesting that
replacement theology.
Yeah. So when you see this stuff in the Bible where it talks about synagogue of Satan, we see it several times in the book of Revelation. And what the synagogue of Satan, I believe, is talking about. I think it's pretty clear from Scripture, because he says that what it goes on to say. They say they are Jews and are not. The church is very guilty of what we call replacement theology, believing that the church has replaced Israel. because Israel rejected their Messiah. And so that they believe that they take all those Old Testament promises that are for Israel. And it's funny, they just take the promises. There's a lot of curses in here too. They don't take the curses. They just take the promises and rob those from Israel and claim them as their own. The Israel and the church, Paul made it pretty clear in Romans. They're very distinct from each other. And God's not done with Israel. Yes, Jesus did get upset. He got very upset with them when he came in for his triumphant entry. We'll get into that more later. He told them he expected them to know the day of their visitation, and they didn't know the day of their visitation. You go, well, how could they know? Well, I will show you in later weeks. There is a mathematical prophecy in the book of Daniel that will tell us the exact day that he rode in on that donkey, and he expected them to know that. So when the church comes in and says, no, we're Israel now, we've replaced Israel, and we claim those promises of Israel, that makes us partners with the enemy and part of what he's calling here the synagogue of Satan. They say they are Jews and are not. They lie. So that is replacement theology in a nutshell. Didn't we talk about it in one of the podcasts? I'm trying to remember. I think we
before. I just want a quick recap.
Yeah, when we did our podcast on Israel, we talked about it a little bit more than that around replacement theology because it is bad. It's a very bad thing that happens, but it's very common in the church, especially the denominational churches. They're very anti-Semitic. So as far as the commendations, um, he's basically saying they're not legalistic, Philadelphia. They aren't reconstructionists, and um, they're going to be compelled to worship, and it's going to lead to the day of vengeance that they're going to escape. As he says, that he will remove them and take them out of the hour of testing that will come upon the whole world.
I like the NASB translation. It says, behold, I will cause those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. I will make them come and bow down at your feet and make them know that I have loved you. So it's more, instead of worship, bowing down to me is like more out of reverence of authority.
Humility and
Yeah.
humbling themselves. That makes sense. That because I don't really, yeah, worshiping seems like a weird thing. King James does have some weird wording sometimes. We could look it up in the Greek, but it is interesting. I think what Pam found in the NASB is it says that they will bow down to them. So the denominational church, when they're because he basically says they're not all going to go to not all the denominational church is going to go to hell, and they're not going to be cast into the tribulation. But uh, it's so the thing is I think he's trying to make it clear that hey, even though this replacement theology stuff is bad, I don't think Jesus is trying to say that it's a salvific issue. I mean, that's where we got to be careful on making things salvific issues that aren't. Yes, it's a big deal. Trying to steal the promises of Israel because a lot of churches are doing that. We need to be praying for Israel and praying for the peace of Jerusalem. But I don't believe that that's going to send anyone to damnation because it's not a salvific issue, in my opinion, either. So he's talking here about Israel. But thou, saith the Lord, that created thee, O Jacob. So that's not the church. O Jacob, that he formed thee, O Israel. So he's calling Jacob and Israel by both names because remember, God renamed Jacob to Israel. He said, fear not, I've redeemed thee. I've called thee by name, thou art mine. So yes, they did blow it, but there will be a remnant that will be saved. And when you pass through the waters, I will be with thee. And through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkst through the fire, you shall not be burned. And it makes us think, and you had to imagine Isaiah probably thinking about this too, possibly. Maybe, uh, actually, maybe not. I was trying to think because with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that may have been after this, but it makes me think of that. that walking through the fire and not being burned like they were. Um, and neither shall the flame be kindled upon thee. So as he continues, he said, for I am the Lord thy God, the Holy One of Israel, the Savior. I gave Egypt for my ransom, Ethiopia and Sheba for thee. Since thou wast precious in my sight, I have been honorable and I have loved thee. Therefore, I will give thee men of thee and people for thy life. Fear not, I am with thee. People try to claim that church, that promise for the church. I've seen pastors use that verse and try to claim it here. There's really not a verse for the church. You can, if we put it, leave it in the context that it's in. Isaiah 43 is talking to Israel, real national Israel, not what people call spiritual Israel. That's national Israel he's talking to there, because he's talking about physical land. All right. So he says, because you've kept the word of my patience, I will keep you from the hour of temptation that will come upon the whole world. So we'll look at and dissect those words a little bit more in just a second. But if you think about, you know, King David, King David, he was an anointed king, but he spent time in exile before he ever became a king. He even took refuge in the cave of Adullam, which you can read about. The other thing about David has a lot of parallels with Christ and in these things, and even with the church. He was refused by his people, just like Jesus was. He gathered three classes of people around him, just like Jesus did. Got the harlots, the tax collectors, the sinners, and all of these people around him, men in debt, in danger, and discontented. And he turned them into mighty men. And then after he was done at Adullam, he left Adullam and received his coronation as king over all of a united Israel at that point. So this whole thing about um, keeping the word of his patience. Think about David when he was in that cave. You know, even though this is written way after David because it's Revelation, but think about those Psalms that David wrote when he was in that cave. He was patiently waiting in that cave, and he was waiting for his season and his time. He got impatient at times, but he was waiting. So this verse right here, I will keep thee from the hour of temptation which shall come upon the whole world. This, because people start trying to twist this verse, they get all twisted off on this. But if you look at the actual Greek words, the literal Greek word means the hour. It's not some generic hour. It's the hour of temptation. And the other word here, temptation, is also trial or testing. And it's this Greek word that we see here, the second Greek word, the underneath there. So those two words together, the hour and the trial, they have that definitive the article on both of them, even in the Greek that he's calling out. So he's going to keep them from that hour and from that temptation. Now, again, that church that was around during the first century when the epistle was written and when the letters were given, that church obviously had things going on there, and there was no great tribulation, but that church was not did not face a lot of the same trials that other churches in Asia Minor faced at that time. The interesting thing is too is this very last part of the verse. He will try them that dwell upon the earth. This word, dwell upon the earth, is a distinctive group from the other. The literal thing is earth dwellers. And when we see the term earth dweller, that's not a good term to have associated with yourself. We're not earth dwellers. We're just passing through. We're sojourners passing through. He's talking here about people of the earth. and you have these Greek words, the Greek word dwell, who are identified with. They identify with the earth. In Philippians and in Hebrews, it mentions that. And then this other Greek word, if we look at the whole part in Greek, it's clear upon all mankind. It's geographically comprehensive. It's not some localized area, it's the entire world. So when we look at it broken down, they're going to be removed. There's immunity from this, taken out of, removed. And then specifically from what? The hour and the temptation. That is for what? To come upon the whole world, which is the focus in Revelation 6. The focus shifts to the earth dwellers. And the entire rest of up until the end of the tribulation focuses on the earth dwellers. So the purpose is to be removed so that the earth dwellers can be tried. And if you read the book of Revelation as we get further into it, it does appear that, if not almost all Gentiles, even believers in the tribulation, will be killed. Now, the church, I believe we're going to be taken out. But if you read through, there is no special protection for Gentiles during the tribulation.
So I'm confused. If the church is taken out, who are the Gentile believers?
They get saved there. That's a good question. So during the tribulation, there will be lots of people saved. But the problem is they don't get the advantage we have here, that we don't have to face that same kind of level. So they're going to go through part of they're going through the entire tribulation, but they're going to get killed. They're not going to make it through because none of them are sealed. You're going to see that it's going to talk later on when we get to Revelation 7. He's going to seal 144,000 Jews. So think about 144,000 Pauls and Peters running around the planet evangelizing. They're going to be able to do a lot of damage to the devil but they're the only ones that are sealed. No one else is sealed. And there's going to be special protections for people that don't take the mark of the beast. But those that, just because you don't take the mark of the beast does not mean you're going to live you don't want to be there. I mean, you do not. And so if anybody's watching this at some point in the future and some crazy event has happened and a lot of people vanish, it's hell on earth that's coming. It's nothing like you ever want to imagine. You'll see as we get further into the book. It is bad. So we went through the heptadic structure for the commendations. What about the concerns? Because all the other churches had concerns. That's intentional. There's no concern for the Church of Philadelphia, which is very interesting that Jesus would not give any. He's so happy with them, no concerns listed. So it's the one church. He goes straight to an exhortation. He says, "Behold, I will come quickly. Behold behold, I come quickly. Behold that fast which thou hast, and let no man take thy crown." So he will come quickly, and he will come like a thief in the night to people that aren't prepared. I don't believe that for us as believers, if we're really observant and watching, it'll be like a thief in the night. I believe, as I've mentioned before, we'll know the season. We're not going to know the exact day, but we'll know when the time is right. Because as those birth pangs that we'll talk about in Revelation chapter 6, as they intensify, that is an indicator that the rapture is very near, or that the tribulation is very near as well. So he gives them the exhortation, "I come quickly, and let no man take thy crown." And as far as let no man rob you is basically what he's saying. So Esau, you go back to Genesis, he lost his place to Jacob. He gave away his birthright for a pot of stew. Reuben lost his place to Judah because remember Reuben, what he did in Genesis and some of his escapades that he had But in Genesis 49, when Jacob pronounces the blessings, he does not give Judah, does not give Reuben. Reuben was the firstborn, but just like Esau was, but he was disinherited from those promises because of the things that he did. Moses, even as great as Moses was, Moses blew it at Meribah. And we talked about that. That God told him the first time, God told him to strike the rock to make water come out of it. And then the second time, he told Moses to speak to the rock. And Moses was mad at the people. And because he was mad at the people, he bore false witness of God. He misrepresented the king. We've talked about that, about taking the Lord's name in vain and misrepresenting him. And I believe that God took that very seriously when Moses did that, and it cost him a trip to the promised land. And then Saul, because of his craziness, things that he did, he lost his place to David. And Shibna lost his place to Illican. So all of these people have been, it looks like they got robbed, but they robbed themselves because they didn't hold fast they didn't hold on to what was theirs. Joab and Abner, or Abathar, both lost their places to Benaiah and Zadok. So in First Kings, this comes up. And then Elijah. Now Elijah didn't do anything wrong, but Elijah was superseded by Elisha as well. So, and Elisha gets the double portion of this whole thing. And I believe Elijah gets set aside because he has another day coming. We see him on the Mount of Transfiguration talking to Jesus, and who's with him? Moses. I think that's a clue as to what we're going to see as the two witnesses a little bit later. All right, let's keep going here. So, holding fast, during the 4th century, the church in Philadelphia stood against the entire Turkish Empire. So, the city was still Philadelphia up until the 14th century. So they did hold fast against the Turks, but it was a self-governed Christian city in the midst of these Muslim hordes around it. It was besieged multiple times, but eventually it fell. So in 1379 to 1390, it was finally overcome by the Turks. So Philadelphia did hold fast as a city until then. Their lamp did not go out like the other churches, which is interesting until that time period. Now, the promise to the overcomer, it's at the very end of it. Him that overcometh, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more. And I will write upon the name of my God and the name of the city of God, which is the New Jerusalem. And we'll get into the New Jerusalem much later in the book of Revelation, which cometh out of heaven from my God, and I write upon him my new name. And then at the very, very end, after he says all of that, he says, he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So the promise to the overcomer, and then he that hath an ear. Just like the previous two that we saw with Thyatira and Sardis. He that hath an ear is at the end. So Philadelphia, no concern. Now, Smyrna didn't have a concern either, but the reason Smyrna didn't have a concern wasn't because they weren't doing anything right. It was because of the persecution. There was massive persecution going on. We talked about that before. But Philadelphia, everything he says about them is good, and it seems like everything is going good for them. And as I mentioned, with Philadelphia, it stood as a Christian city for a long time. Laodicea will wait for next week or 2 weeks from now. So if we look at how this applies to the churches, well, we've looked at the other churches before, but Philadelphia, basically, they were a missionary church. They reached out, they went to other cities around Asia Minor. So if you take that into the modern context, the non-denominational church would be the missionary church. So open doors. We think about open doors. God closes one door, he'll often open another. We've heard that said. And a lot can be said about that. Sometimes open doors, most of the time, they're a good thing, especially if God's opening those doors and God's closing those doors. It can be a very interesting thing. Just a real quick little interesting thing there in the Philippines, a lot of Christians in the Philippines, and um, there was economic pressure in the Philippines where there were massive poverty going on in the Philippines.
Tear down.
There were massive poverty going on in the Philippines, and so it forced a lot of Filipinos, like 50,000 of them in Saudi Arabia, and they went to Saudi Arabia to be maids and work in houses and stuff. And it opened the door for them to share the gospel. So where they suffered in the Philippines, God moved them into Saudi Arabia where they were able to actually be effective witnesses. So again, closed doors and open doors aren't necessarily a bad thing. Look at Rome. Rome caused the whole world to be taxed. And that opened a door for Mary and Joseph to be forced to go to Bethlehem. They had to go to Bethlehem because that's what the prophecy said. And again, in Genesis 41, the whole world was put into a famine just to get 70 Israelis to Egypt, to get Jacob and his family to move to Egypt. So, there is an anti-Christian groundswell. We see it in the world. It's bad. Um, they're tearing up heritages. They're destroying monuments. They're rewriting history. They're doing everything they can to dismantle 2 centuries of God's blessings on this country. And if the church doesn't wake up, we're gonna lose this nation, unfortunately, if God doesn't do something and the church doesn't wake up. So there's always open doors, and there may be open doors that we may be forced through that we don't like, but they may look bad on one side, but in the end they will be good. So the overcomer, Philadelphia is an overcomer. And he says he'll give them a pillar in the temple, the name of God, the name of the city, and a new name. The interesting thing is he says a pillar in the temple. It's something to give them comfort, almost, because the city of Philadelphia had all those earthquakes and all was destroyed multiple times. So the pillars, the standing pillars, would be a reminder to them of something secure and stable that was a place of safety. Personal application, we've looked at those other churches before. In Philadelphia, I would say the application would be loyal ambassadorship, which we've addressed a few times, that we need to be loyal to King Jesus. And being loyal to King Jesus is being a good representation of him and not bearing false witness of him like it's so easy to do. And then the promise of the overcomer, we saw these promises for the other churches. And then Philadelphia, a pillar in the temple, name of God, name of the city, new name. Laodicea, next time.
Okay, so
Missionary church, I'm almost done.
okay, I have a question.
Yes.
So I can wait till you're done.
No, go ahead.
It sounds like Philadelphia is the church that he talks about taking out, like the rapture.
Yes.
But yet you started off by saying that's not us.
No, we want to be Philadelphia. We want to,
Sure.
we're all 7 of these churches. It's a good question. Pam asked, about Philadelphia is because they're taken out. Is Philadelphia us if we do this prophetically? And all churches wish they were Philadelphia, obviously. But the thing is, the real truth of the matter is all 7 of these churches, every church has some element of those things in it. So there is no perfect church. Find me a perfect church and I'll mess it up by going to it. So no perfect churches. Philadelphia would be the missionary church, because the missionary church that started showing up in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that missionary church that we see is not anti-Semitic. and is very much Bible believing and has been very much an influence to the nations in going out. And again, those two groups that we saw before, you can see medieval church warning to go into the tribulation. The denominational church, there's somewhat of a warning there. Philadelphia will be taken out. So those of us that have those elements of Philadelphia in us, that believe the promises of God, I do believe that we will escape the tribulation. Doesn't mean we're going to escape all hardship. He never said, he said you'll have, that's what people get hung up on. They think because we have hardship that means we'll go through the tribulation as well. This is a different time. This is a thing you don't want to be anything a part of. As you will see as we get into the later chapters starting in Revelation 6, it's a very bad and dark place to be. You do not want to be there whatsoever. You want to miss that thing. I'd rather watch it from the mezzanine and not watch it from down here.